I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Sergio Marchi, the Honorable Sergio Marchi, with me, a former member of Parliament, former cabinet minister, and we've just had a conversation about where we are from a geopolitical standpoint. We're now going to focus in on Canada versus the United States, because Sergio Marchi has got some really, I think, poignant points of view of where Canada is in its trade relationships with the United States. Honorable Sergio Marchi, well, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back, Brian. It's good to be with you.
So where do you think we are? And what's your advice to Canada and to our Prime Minister Mark Carney, given that Donald Trump is slapping us with more tariffs again?
Yeah, it's been a real drama, a real roller coaster with the Donald, and I'm getting the sense, obviously, that he doesn't love our country, nor does he respect our political leaders, given what he does and what he says. But I wasn't surprised that we didn't make the deadline for our trade deal on the 1st of August, because I think Prime Minister Carney and his team were pretty open about signaling that they were probably going to miss the deadline. And for me, I accept at face value that the Canadians didn't like what was on the table. And rather than sinking into a bad deal, it's best to have no deal. And given that the doors are still open for discussions, we should take those discussions and see if we can formulate a deal that's good for both countries. So I think rather than quickly retaliating right now, because you can retaliate at any time, I think it's best for Carney to keep his powder dry as he is. But at the same time, we can't wait forever, because there's many sectors with tariffs that are biting hard. The 35% is not as consequential because it only applies to about 5% of products. But it's also difficult to kind of get a sense of what is holding the deal back, because you and I aren't privy and we're not at the table. But again, Canadians have a pretty good tradition of strong negotiators, so I think they know what a bad deal looks like.
I had an interesting conversation on Tuesday with a professor from Georgetown University, a former economist, very learned gentleman who actually was a diplomat in Moscow prior to the fall of the USSR, in Ukraine, etc. Anders Asland. And he said that there's 4 models of dealing with Donald Trump: El Salvador, Hungary, the UK, and China. And he said that El Salvador is a copy, that Hungary is a somewhat of a copy and putting up with, that the UK and France are, and the EU is flatter like crazy and play to his ego and see what you can do, and that China is stand tough, because they know that you need the rare earth metals and you need the consumer products, etc. Otherwise, inflation's going to go through the roof in the United States. And he says that he thinks that the Chinese strategy is actually working out the best so far. And he said, and here's a person from Scandinavia that is working and living in Washington, D.C., professor at Georgetown University, who said, Canada, you don't realize how strong of a position you got. The United States needs your energy. They need your water. They need your electricity. They need your oil and gas. And you're tied in so many other industries, steel, aluminum, cars, etc. You can stand tough. But at the same time, people that stand tough get his wrath, they get retaliated.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, that his erratic personality is the biggest hindrance in dealing with the United States and now the trade negotiations, because he's unpredictable. His word is worthless. He turns on a dime. He has no loyalty except to himself. He's got no interest in the world other than the G1, namely America. He doesn't deal with facts, Brian. He doesn't read his briefing books. I know that. And therefore, he's a politician, or he's an individual that goes by the gut, by his intuition. And oftentimes that intuition and that gut is way off. Speaking to your professor about the 4 different models, China and Canada are the only 2 countries who've had the temerity to strike back. And obviously we're seeing his wrath. But I'm not surprised that he says China is probably the best strategy. But also China is quite unique. We don't have a population of 1.3 billion. We're not producing products for the world at cheap prices. So I can understand China. Canada, is 10 times smaller than the United States. Our saving grace so far is that we have a NAFTA agreement, which exempts 95% of our products from tariffs.
But
We've
that's got to be
obviously got new
renegotiated a year
tariffs
from
on it.
now. It's got
I'm
to be
sorry?
renegotiated next year. It's got to be renegotiated next year. So
Yeah.
yeah, it could be a saving grace for a year, but not for long.
And what do you do with a guy who doesn't respect his word or doesn't respect rules? What's the deal worth when you're dealing with Trump? He doesn't care if we go to the WTO. He'll keep appealing. He'll keep his lawyers busy. So even next year, all of the tariffs that he's imposed are basically illegal, quote unquote, under the NAFTA agreement. But he did it anyway. He couldn't give 2 hoots. So I'm hoping that there's something credible in our renegotiation that has staying power. Otherwise, it's not worth the deal. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And that's why I say his personality is the number one challenge for us. How do you deal with this guy? How do you make deals stick? Even in his arrangements with the Europeans or the British, there was nothing signed. So who knows where this thing goes next week or next month or next year. So that's the uncertainty that plagues us, both in terms of uncertainty in the investment, where it's easier to go to the States rather than face his wrath in Canada, and the uncertainty of who you're dealing with. It's not easy, but at some point you have to draw the line. You can't be a patsy. I don't think bullies respect patsies in the end. And with increasing time, I think if he's raising all of those tariffs on all of those countries, guess what? He's going to place a tax on U.S. importers, and those U.S. importers aren't going to swallow it. They're going to pass it on to the consumers. So Americans will pay, but that takes time.
Sergio, I've negotiated a deal with someone who tried to bully me. And then we came to an agreement, and that individual reneged on the agreement. And it was not a signed agreement, but it was a handshake agreement. And they reneged on it. You never trust that person again. You never,
Exactly.
ever want to
Yeah.
do a deal with them again. Even when people say, "Oh, you can do a deal," you should get into a room and you should mediate. You should get into it. You should. But once burned, you never want to go back again. Isn't that where we are right now?
You're absolutely right. I don't think many people, except certain dictators, trust Trump. I think most opinions of leaders are the same in private, as I'm sure what Canadians think of Trump, and you can see where the polls are. Canadians aren't buying American products. They're ticked off. They're pissed off at a guy who shows no respect. So you're right. If you get burned, you learn the lesson. I mean, look at the technology tax that Carney dropped. I was against that. I think you hold that as leverage. You roll it into the negotiations. But he dropped the digital tax. What did it get us? It got us nothing. All it got us is a 35% hit on the tariffs. So you're absolutely right. I think we are weary of Trump. The only thing is, he's the only superpower leader in the world. And we've got almost 75% of our trade eggs in his basket. So while we try to diversify, while we try to create new relationships, that's going to take time, which means we still have to deal with the big man. But it's not pleasant, that's for damn sure.
I interviewed an economist from the West Coast of Canada, and he said, Brian, it's our own fault. Any company that had 75, 80% of its sales to one customer would be out of business. Banks wouldn't finance them because they had undiversified risk. They had way too much credit risk. They had too much dependency on that one customer. And it's our own fault that we have become so reliant on the United States, that we believed that this free trade agreement would go on the way it was negotiated initially forever. What do you think? What do you say to that?
Yeah, Canada has tried to diversify our trade forever. I tried to do my best when I was Minister of International Trade. But as the old adage goes, you can take the horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink if he doesn't want to. And the point here is that despite the fact that governments have tried to diversify, when you're a Canadian businessman or woman and you want to trade, it is so natural, or it was so natural, to dip your first toe in American waters. Why is that? Well, one, they're our neighbor, which means it's far less expensive to bring products into the United States. We enjoy special access. They're the premier market in the world. They speak one of our official languages. And so it's so easy for Canadians to first try the American market. And if you try it and it works, they take the view, well, if it ain't broke it, why do I have to spend more money to take a product to Chile or to China or to Japan? In other words, Canadian businesses found it very, very convenient and lucrative to be dealing with the United States. So they wouldn't listen to the Canadian government to say, fine, do your business in the United States, but protect your backside. Let's go to Chile. Let's go to Europe. Let's go to Japan. And they said, yeah. But they were making money. Now, all of a sudden, they got a very different cat in the White House, a very unfriendly cat, and now we're scurrying. So it wasn't necessarily, I think, placing the blame on governments. It was a natural for business leaders. If Hungary occupied the same real estate that Canada, or if Europe was Canada, you know what, Brian? Their business leaders would do the same.
I don't know if I agree with you. And I'm going to, show my rudimentary knowledge of Canadian history that you probably know a million times better than I. But prior to Confederation, there was a lot of pressure to join the United States. The United States wanted to annex most of Western Canada at the time, and business people were thinking that might make sense. And John A. Macdonald, my understanding is he had a national program, and it was a combination of tariffs. Both import tariffs against the United States and export tariffs that diminished the likelihood that businesses would trade with the United States, and a huge infrastructure plan where he made trading across Canada far easier by building the CPR. Should our government be doing similar things that say, ties Canada more closely together? And certainly Carney has been talking about national infrastructure, but also make it more difficult to trade with the United States and easier, therefore, to trade as, what had happened after Confederation is a lot more trade with the UK, with
Yeah.
Great Britain.
No, I think the 1988 election, if you remember, was essentially a referendum on do we or don't we do a trade deal with the United States. And there was a lot of back and forth. There was a moment there that John Turner, the Liberal leader at the time, was looking like he was going to win, and he didn't want to have the trade deal because he thought we would lose our economic and ultimately our political sovereignty. Brian Mulroney won that election, and therefore we got the deal. So that has brought us deeper into the American orbit. I mean, two things about that. On the one hand, it's good news. It was good news because our trade with the United States expanded exponentially. And everybody thought us and Mexico had made it big time, right, with the United States. No one else enjoyed that access. The downside is it integrated us much more with the United States. So when Trump came along and he wants to disrupt, it's a major, major headache. So I believe that Carney wants to build these national projects. I believe he wants to work more closely with the premiers. I think he wants to build pipelines. But that's going to take time. So it's not going to be tomorrow morning that we can replace the United States. And that's the real rub. So we've got to walk and chew gum. We've still got to try to keep Donald Trump on our good side while we also try to diversify away from him and the United States. Not an easy thing, but those are the two tangents that I think our governments are dealing with concurrently.
So at the same time as we negotiated that free trade agreement and dramatically lowered tariff barriers, we also depreciated our currency fairly dramatically. We were above par in the mid 1980s, and we went down to, I think it was 63 or something like that cents, in the 1990s. Now, part of that was the Canadian peso crisis and fiscal issues, but part of it was that we had a strategy of lowering our currency, and we didn't fight that with the Canadian the Bank of Canada. So we lowered our wage rates. We lowered our income. We lowered our GDP because we allowed our currency to decline, and we cheapened our goods, and that helped us as well going into the United States.
Yeah, there's no question that there was always that balance between being concerned about the currency level, but being concerned also for the attractiveness of your products. We've had a good, seriously, I mean, we've had our differences and always will with the Americans, whether it's softwood lumber or whether it's supply management. They love their trade rules, except when those rules work against them. Then they try to squeeze you with their might and try to manage, quote unquote, trade, manage how much lumber you bring into Canada, manage how much other products. So we've had it good for a long time. And now, who would have expected an unhinged Trump to come along? And now we're paying the price, as you suggested earlier, that while the going was good, we should have kept changing, just like any good sports club. And you've been involved with hockey. Good winning teams keep winning by changing. They don't keep status quo. They always add new players, young players. In hindsight, we should have been doing that while the gravy was good with the Americans. But Canadian business leaders chose otherwise, and now we got to get out of that out of that ditch that we are now in. I think we can and we will, but there's a transition between being in the ditch with the Americans and Trump and then creating new roads and new pathways to other countries and other leaders. That transition takes time, and that time is going to be painful, but we'll weather it.
One last question, sir. You mentioned the 1988 election. In that election, in a famous debate, John Turner said something like, you're giving up our economic sovereignty, sir, and when you give up our economic sovereignty, eventually you'll give up our political sovereignty. Given what Donald Trump did last week, which was dramatically increase our tariffs because he thought that Mark Carney did the wrong thing on Palestine. Have we given up our political sovereignty? Was John Turner right in 1988?
If John was a good man and he deeply, deeply believed that this deal was flawed, and he paid a huge personal price, as you know, because when he left politics, he didn't sit on many lucrative boards. The Canadian business leaders shunned him. He paid a huge political price, given that he was for a while a private sector king. But if he was alive, he'd probably tell you and I, Brian, I told you so. And how can you argue against what he was espousing when you get a guy like Trump? I mean, if we had another Obama or if we had another Clinton, then Trump couldn't say, I told you so, because there was respect, there was good trade, there was mutual benefits. But Donald Trump throws all of those bets off the table. So, I can see John saying, I told you so, and his time has come.
I was in Florida on business recently, and we were talking about the upcoming election and this threat that Donald Trump was going to run for a third term, even though the 22nd Amendment doesn't allow him to. And they said, "Oh no, you've got it all wrong, Brian. It's Donald Jr. that's going to run, and he's going to win in a landslide." And I went, "Oh gosh."
Yeah, just like dictators do, they pass it on to their kids, right?
Honorable Sergio Marchi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Brian. Thanks.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from Canada and from the United States at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.